Hi, I'm Rhiannon from the Epsom Bakehouse, and thanks for tuning in to the Bake Bread at Home podcast. This show is dedicated to helping you bake brilliant bread that wows your friends and family without the need for fancy ingredients or equipment in your home kitchen.
If you've ever wondered, can I freeze that bread? Then keep listening, as this episode's for you. I first got to know today's guest through online small business networking and was delighted to see someone so passionate about using their home freezer, because I am too. Effective use of your home freezer can help you reduce your food waste, save money, and cook more easily. And who wouldn't want that in today's busy life? Through her simple but ingenious tips, like freezing flat to save space and using your frozen strawberries in a daiquiri, Kate Hall, founder of the online program Your Full Freezer, and now author of the Full Freezer Method, can help you save time and money through freezing food. And today, Kate is here to talk to you about how best to freeze your bread at home. So welcome, Kate. It's wonderful to speak with you today. Can you tell me a little bit more about what led you to develop Your Full Freezer?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Rhiannon. I'm so excited to be here. So I started freezing various different ingredients. So just to be clear to your listeners and your viewers, I used to batch cook. I was very much into the batch cooking, but nowadays the full freezer method is very much about freezing the individual items that we end up with. So it could be bread, which we will obviously get to, but it's those things that end up going in the bin. So, you know, the veg in the bottom of your fridge, the fruit going off in the fruit bowl, all those individual ingredients. And essentially it was because I was wasting so much myself. I was on maternity leave with our second child, and I was going through that process of attempting to batch cook, attempting to refill my freezer, which I'd done for over a decade. And it was like a security blanket to me to have, you know, the freezer full of good, nice, hearty kind of meals and everything. And I just kept feeling like I was failing. I kept on buying the food, good intentions, and then I just wouldn't cook it. It'd end up going in the bin, and we'd end up getting a takeaway or a sling in the oven meal. And, you know, I think the same, struggling with the same challenges that most people are struggling with every day, that, you know, the cost of living is going up, and, you know, the cost of food is becoming more difficult. And for me at that point, I was, as I say, on maternity leave, and it was coming up to that 9-month point where statutory maternity leave runs out. And me and my husband had a very frank conversation, which was essentially, we really need to tighten our belts, or I was going to have to go back to work at the 9-month point instead of the 12 months. And I just had a light bulb moment that was like, well, hang on a minute, if I can freeze a meal that I've batch cooked, surely I can freeze those individual ingredients and just press pause on them to just give me a little bit longer to figure out how I'm going to use them, and to separate the prep from the cooking as well. So to be able to go, okay, the toddler is eating a biscuit, the baby is sleeping for at least the next 3 minutes. I can just chop up this one pepper or this one onion or whatever it might be and get it into the freezer, so that when I come to cook with it later, it's there. I'm not having to go back to the shop. I'm not discovering it having gone mouldy in the fridge. And I'm not even having to get the chopping board out. I can just sling things into a pan. And that basically escalated to the point where I'd grown an entire stash of different ingredients. And I realised I could cook full meals using my stash of ingredients. And I got food safety certified and everything, because I was very nervous about making myself and the family sick. And then it was basically with the pandemic that I started to share on a greater scale, and to try and reach other people with it, because I just felt like it was a really useful thing that we were never taught to do in school. You know, it was never kind of the go-to way to use your freezer. And yeah, growing it from there has been just the most amazing experience. And a lot of funny looks in the early days, but I think, you know, I get a much stronger reaction now of people going, oh, actually, this is quite handy. So it's yeah, it's lovely. It's really lovely.
I know, and that is just a fantastic story of it grown out of necessity, but actually what you're sharing is something that we can all relate to, and nobody wants that little bit of, that final pepper, like you say, or that bit of fruit that's just gonna, it's gonna end up in the food waste, and you'd rather do something with it. And like you say, everyone's perhaps mindful of budgets and mindful of not wasting food, and you'd like to just use up what you've got instead of having to go back to the shops. Would home baked loaf, and I have a delicious loaf here like this, would that be something that you could freeze at home, and how long could you have that in your freezer?
Yes, absolutely. So you can freeze any bread. Some breads will freeze better than others. So if you've got things like a sourdough or just a simple bread, sort of flour, water, salt, that will hold up best, sort of better than your kind of enriched breads and everything. But you can freeze them all. There's no reason that you can't. The only thing that I would say to be wary of is if you've got a really nice sort of crusty loaf or something, is that if it is in the freezer for a while, and especially if it's going to get knocked about at all, then you're going to lose that lovely, nice, crunchy, crusty crust, basically. It is going to end up flaking off. So if you've got breads like that and you really want to make sure that you retain that kind of nice crusty element, then really you don't want to be freezing them for more than a couple of weeks. But if you've got something that's a little bit more sturdy, or a soft loaf or anything like that, then 2 months, sort of a month, 2 months. But you can freeze things for longer than that. It's basically just the longer that they are in the freezer for, the more the quality is going to deteriorate. And we've all done that thing of, slinging your bread rolls in the freezer and not protecting them properly, and then going to them and just going, this is, like it's got the ice all over it. It's definitely freezer burnt, and it's not going to be very nice for your sandwich. But that doesn't mean you should necessarily chuck it in the bin. Like, you can still use things. It's just, as I say, the quality isn't going to be as good. So you want to tweak the way that you're using them.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that'll be, first of all, a fantastic news for all the home bread bakers listening, that they can freeze pretty much the majority of breads as long as you kind of protect it well, and wrap it up. What would be the best way? I mean, I can share that I wrap mine in reusable kind of plastic bags and seal them, so that trying to get as much of the moisture away from the bread as possible, so it's not drying out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Freezer bags are an absolute must, and it needs to be a proper freezer bag. So none of the thin sandwich bags that you just fold over. It needs to be kind of, like you say, a resealable one. If you want to give an extra layer of protection, you could use beeswax wraps. You could use cling film. I'm not a fan of cling film personally. You could use foil as well, and that can obviously be reused as well if you're baking bread sort of relatively often and you want to unfold and refold. Then I think the planet always appreciates it if we can try and reuse stuff, and I encourage you to reuse your freezer bags as well if they're not sort of silicone or PEVA ones, like the ones from the supermarket, or like IKEA ones, things like that. Can totally be reused. But it's that key of making sure that you're squeezing as much air out as possible, and really protecting what's inside from the cold, because when we get that sort of freezer burn building up, any mottling, it's basically dehydration. So it's where any moisture that is within the bread is coming out onto the surface of it and into the freezer itself. And as you say, it's just going to damage the flavour. And also, if we're not wrapping things tightly, and if we're storing breads alongside foods that are very strong in scent, then our breads are going to absorb those smells and those flavours. So trying to keep them stored alongside other quite neutral smells, or if you've got, if you can have a specific drawer or space for your baked goods, then that is definitely a good idea. You don't want to store your bread next to your onions unless it's an onion bread. Like, you want to try and keep that separate. So yeah, just making sure you really protect what you've got as much as possible is a really good idea.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do try to keep mine at the top, and I probably have more bread than most in my freezer because once I've had an online class, there's always spare, and it goes into my freezer to be used up later. A couple of things from what you said there, I think it's fascinating with the wrapping it up and storing it. One thing I will say, and this I will say it has been frozen. Obviously, I cannot do too much to flatten this because I want it to be a well-risen loaf of bread. Are there any ways of storing space apart from obviously kind of vacuuming down your bags as much as possible when you're freezing bread?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you've got a loaf, unless there is a particular reason that you need it to be frozen as a loaf, then I would recommend slicing first. And that goes for things like buns as well. If you've got a bun or a roll or a cob or whatever it might be, if you're going to cut it in half at some point, then cutting it in half before will basically mean that you can kind of create a flatter bag of bread, so you can have all of your halves kind of across the bag. And as well, you know, if you've sliced a loaf, don't think that you've got to slice it like that, like you sorry, that you've got to store it like that. You can of course take the slices, you could slice that up and then take your slices and pop them flat in a freezer bag. And if you've got a fairly large freezer bag, you know, you could fit sort of 6 to 8 slices in one bag if you want. If you want to use multiple bags and have sort of, you know, 2 or 4 to grab it, you know, for some sandwiches or whatever as you need them, you can do that if that helps with space. Just obviously preferably reusing the bags. But yeah, making sure that you slice it up before is just a really helpful way to give you more flexibility with how you're using the space, but also it will speed up the defrosting process. So when you actually want to use that bread, and I find that particularly with things like rolls, because you'll think, oh yeah, that's started to defrost and everything, and then you go to cut into it and it's still frozen in the middle. It's like, I really want my sandwich, which obviously, you know, there are things we can do to defrost and to speed up the process, but if you know that actually it's already cut in half, it's going to help to speed up the defrosting so much. So yeah, always cut it.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think that's a really great tip actually with the laying flat. I would definitely be trying that. And are there any kind of best ways you would suggest for defrosting, just leaving it out on the side at room temperature?
Yeah, so bread is one of the only things really that you can just leave out. I would recommend keeping it in a freezer bag, or you know, keeping it covered to try and avoid it turning stale in the fresh air. But if you're in a bit more of a rush and you don't want to just kind of leave it out at room temperature, you can also, you know, you can toast. If you've already cut it into slices and you were going to toast it, you can toast it straight from frozen. You don't need to defrost it first. You can also microwave on very low and very short bursts. And I would always put a piece of kitchen towel underneath just to absorb any moisture that does come out, because you know, none of us want our soggy bottoms on our buns. But if you do that, that will help to kind of heat it through, thaw it much quicker. And as I say, if you've cut it in half first, like literally you could be talking sort of 20-30 seconds to get it warmed through, and you know, to start to make your sandwich. The only other thing is as well, if you want to put it in the oven, I mean, it is one of those things that energy wise, it's probably not the most efficient way to heat through. But if you had a loaf that you wanted to crispen up, putting it in about 170 degrees C-ish. Obviously, it kind of depends a bit on the size of what it is you're heating, but just checking every few minutes.
Just had one tiny question on bread dough as well. If you make a large batch of dough and you don't have time to bake it, is there any way of freezing that to kind of stop the process halfway?
Yes, so yes, you can. I hasten to add here, I am not an expert bread baker, so I will, you know, leave that side of things to you. But there is no safety reason that you can't freeze your dough. And from the perspective of, you know, it rising and everything, it shouldn't be an issue. So you could freeze it if you just needed it and you hadn't done the first rise yet. then you could freeze it at that point, and then you could thaw it in the fridge later and, you know, do the first rise, knock it back, and then let it rise again. Or you could go through the whole process and then freeze it already shaped and ready to go. So it depends what you're doing. What I would say as a non-bread baker, and as a, you know, I'm taking that responsibility, is test it with the recipe first. So test a small amount and make sure you are happy with how it's risen, because it will, if you freeze it before it's risen at all, it will take about twice as long to actually rise. So you might be thinking, oh God, I've ruined my dough here. I went to all that effort, I've frozen it, and now, you know, what a waste of time. You're going to have to leave it for longer. And you need to just test it and make sure you are happy with the results. But you can absolutely do it safely. And if you know, if you freeze it in small quantities as well, you know, then you've got that flexibility that it's like, okay, well, I've frozen, you know, a certain amount, maybe you've frozen into sort of roll sizes, but if you decided you wanted to, you know, and actually you might have to correct me on this, because again, not an expert here, but if you've got the option there where it's like, well, actually, I don't know if I want to make a small loaf or rolls out of this dough or a larger loaf, you could freeze it in the smaller quantities. And then if you decide, actually, I want to make a larger loaf, you've got that option to take multiple out, allow them to thaw in the fridge, and then recombine them and then make your bigger loaves. So just thinking about the quantities you're freezing in when you're freezing that dough is well worth kind of considering. And of course, if you freeze the dough as well, you've got the option there to freeze it flatter and in smaller amounts and everything. So you've got more flexibility with your space as well.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'm looking forward to this, because I think, again, time is never really on our side, is it, if you've got a busy life? And being able to maybe make up that batch of dough and freeze half of it, like you say, portioned out ready. I think I would say maybe do it at the point where you've risen it, or where you've just made the dough, and freeze it like that. Like, as you say, it then still has something to do when it comes out of the freezer, and it perhaps doesn't lose too much moisture in the freezer. Absolutely, but it's fantastic. I think people will be really happy to hear that they can freeze their dough, because it's, you know, it's a great one to be able to do. One I might suggest that you try it with as well is pizza dough, because obviously if you rise that first, your pizza is going to end up flat, so there isn't that much pressure if it doesn't rise lots again the second time. Actually, what you wanted was a nice flat base for your pizza, maybe a little bit of crust. So that might be one to try out.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. Definitely pizza dough is a win.
Well, all of these tips have been brilliant, okay, and I really appreciate them. And I think all the home bread bakers listening will be thinking, actually, these are things I can incorporate into my life. But it's not just bread, obviously, that you talk about in your full freezer, and you've actually written a book with your tips called Your Full Freezer Method. It would be great to just hear a little bit more about the book and who the tips are for.
Thank you so much. So yes, this is the book, if you're looking for it on a shelf in due course. So it comes out on the 14th of March, The Full Freezer Method. And I mean, to be honest, it's really for anybody who has a freezer. I'd love to say, you know, that it's really niched down, but actually, if you are, you know, baking bread at home, making meals, batch cooking, meal planning, winging it, you know, anybody, I personally think can benefit from knowing how to use their freezer more effectively. So, you know, although it is a method and there's a process and there are steps that I recommend to follow, people can completely pick and choose what is relevant to them. And there's a section in the book which is called The Full Freezer Loaves. And I basically take you through sort of the different phases and I think kind of choices in life. So whether you are like I say, you know, really into batch cooking, really into meal planning, or having to wing it at the moment, like, you know, you get to 5 p.m. and it's like, oh God, what am I going to make? Knowing you've got the ingredients there, or knowing you can press pause on ingredients that you meant to use but you haven't used. If you're trying to eat healthier, then it's a brilliant way to make sure you're getting more fruit and vegetables. They're not going in the bin, they're going in the freezer instead, and then you're knowing how to use them. If you're living on your own. If you're a single parent as well, I have so many single parents in my community who had got into a situation where it was like, well, I'm eating the same as my kid because it's just easier to cook the same thing, but then missing so many foods that they've loved for years, but they just can't justify buying a pack of whatever it might be because they'd always waste half of it. Now that they know that they can freeze the other half, it's just enabling that ability to reintroduce foods that they love, whilst also, being able to be thrifty about it as well. It's really all about just that process of feeling confident, of using the freezer to just press pause on those foods that usually would end up going in the bin, and then feeling confident about using them later as well, and making sure that they don't just go into the freezer and then never come out again, because obviously that's something I've been very guilty of in the past as well. It's hopefully just going to help people to look at their freezer in a different way, and just give them a little bit more control and flexibility around being able to eat the foods they enjoy, in quantities that they like, and to just feel generally more in control, I think, of cooking, and trying to make things for ourselves as much as we can as well. I know for me, with your content around baking bread, we're becoming more, I think, more aware of ultra processed foods, and trying to do things ourselves as much as possible. And the freezer is something that can really, really help to enable the practicalities of being able to do that and give us some flexibility around it. So yeah.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I think if you do have access to a freezer, and I appreciate that isn't potentially not everyone does, but if you can freeze even a small freezer at the top of the fridge, and have, like you say, those pieces of ingredients that you can use up later on, and you don't feel like you've wasted them, and you don't feel like you're missing out, as you say, on using up those foods. It's a fantastic idea. And Kate, if people are looking for you online, where can they find you? Or you're on social media and your website. What are your links?
Sure. So my website's thefullfreezer.com, and you can find me on pretty much all the social media at The Full Freezer.
But I'll pop all the links in the notes below this interview, and you be sure to go and check out Kate at The Full Freezer. And thank you so much for joining us today. It's been wonderful to chat all about freezing bread, and what you can do with your homemade bread. It's wonderful to get those tips and to help all those home bread bakers who are thinking, can I freeze that bread? And the answer sounds like a resounding yes. So thank you so much for joining me today, Kate. It's been wonderful to chat with you, and everyone go and check out The Full Freezer.
Thank you.